Welcome to What Worked For Me May Not Work For You, the podcast where I explore my journey of self-discovery and transformation. We delve into how I gained fitness, my path to weight loss, the fitness gains, and how it was all driven by the desire to wanting to podium in masters bike racing in Northern California. Join us as we unravel what worked for me may not work for you. This time I'd like to talk about my diet a little bit more. And so people always ask me, what did you do? How did it work? How did you drop the weight, essentially? Because I as I said in my introduction, I went from, 265 pounds and I'm down to about 200 pounds right now in the course of the last two and a half years. And essentially it started with a full-on 2-week strict keto diet, which probably lasted about a month, and in doing that I lost a lot of energy. I couldn't exercise very much, and I talked about it in the introduction, but focusing in on the diet, I lost 25-30 pounds really quickly, but it does take a toll on your body. And one of the things I was conscious of is fad diets. I'm not a big fan of diet fads or anything like that, so I wanted to make sure that this was going to be a lifestyle change, a choice, rather than just a diet. So when we were going through and I was doing the keto, and you go through the keto flu, because the first 7 days are the hardest. I mean, you've basically cut out all the sugar, you cut out the carbs, you're eating and running on fat, you're burning the fat for fuel. That's kind of the emphasis in keto, and you go pretty down, pretty tired, pretty quick, and you get like flu-like symptoms. But after the first week, you kind of balance out and you get real energetic and you feel a bit more alert, and you can, you get what everybody's talking about with the ketones, which is your body's generating these things to, burn and get rid of the natural fats in the body, fats for fuel, which was great. But as I mentioned, it didn't do very well for exercise. So generally, a keto diet and exercise don't blend very well together. So you have to find a balance. So over the course of the next year or so, I worked out various different things. Like, it was okay to eat on the bike. It was okay to fuel the work while I was riding. So I tried lots of different things. I ended up on strop waffles is my favorite thing to eat while I'm riding. I don't do very well on gels. They mess me up a bit. But whatever works for you, figure out what it takes to fuel yourself while you're riding, and that's going to balance you out. So then we started looking a bit more into keto, because we'd done we signed up to something called Keto Cycle. It was like a year's thing. They help you with menu items. You live to the strict diet, and it's very strict keto, but doesn't take into account anybody that wants to exercise and so on. And so then we started, digging in a bit more. My wife and I, she was very supportive, and we found that essentially what keto really is trying to limit the number of carbs on a daily basis. So it isn't what most people think is, you can't eat that, it's got carbs in it. You can't eat that, it's got, it's full of carbs. And it became a balance of, the recommended for keto is 30 grams of carbs a day, and that's net carbs. So something you look at could have 20 grams of carbs in it, but only 1 gram of that is sugar. So now you've got a 19 gram carb, balance. And so we started looking around, and you can find these yogurts, and there's bread manufacturers, believe it or not, which I use a lot now because I'm a big sandwich guy. Bread manufacturers where it's the net carbs is 2 grams. So it has 15 grams of carbs in it, but because 14 grams of it is fiber, it nets out to like 2 grams. So you count that to your keto gram balance, because the rest of it doesn't count because fiber doesn't get absorbed or whatever it is, and so on. So that starts to change the mechanism of the diet and how you want to work and what your body can use and so on. So I started mapping all of that, and sure enough, I didn't lose weight as fast because I was eating more carbs now, but I was still losing weight. So as I said, this took 2.5 years to go from 260 to 200. And a year ago from now, and this is November 2023 now, a year ago I looked and I was 12 to 14 pounds heavier than I am right now. So, and I'm certainly eating a lot more carbs this year. To the point, sometimes my wife makes a cake and I will eat the cake, and that's it. But there are different things that you can do to balance it out, like sugar alternatives, stevias, monk fruit. Monk fruit's a really good one, actually. There are bread alternatives, so the keto bread, there's a really good one I get from our local supermarket. It's like 2 grams of carbs, but it's almost exactly the same as normal bread. And I've been through lots of different options, and some of them are just like cardboard, others are not. As I said, I'm a sandwich guy, so I like that. I went through the stage of making my own pizza bases, lots of mozzarella cheese. It's quite heavy in cheese, and as much as I like cheese, there's only so much cheese you can have in a pizza if it's part of the base and so on. They do chicken bases. But I landed on cauliflower bases, and sure enough, supermarkets in the last year and a half started stocking pre-built, cauliflower-based pizzas, and then you can get those at restaurants now, and you can. It's becoming more and more accessible to eat keto out and about and not have to do specific requests. I will say though, we went back to the UK about a year ago and I tried eating keto in the UK and ironically I thought it was going to be easier, but it wasn't. They didn't have a lot of keto stuff in the supermarkets. They didn't, change anything in the restaurants or the pubs. We were there for 2 weeks and I'm pretty sure I put more weight on before we came back. So it was a lot easier to do in the US for sure. A lot more things are accessible in the supermarkets to be keto and to balance out, unless that is just a California thing, which is kind of where I'm based. So, but yeah, the net of it is I went full on keto and dropped weight, got into the process relatively quickly, and then started to dig in a bit more with my wife, as I said, and we found out that you can do what they sometimes label as dirty keto, but essentially it's finding the right balance and tracking what you're doing. I mean, I still don't eat potatoes, I don't eat pasta, I don't eat French fries, I don't eat anything kind of root vegetables I try to avoid, but at the same time, I'll swap out rice, for example, with cauliflower rice, a healthy alternative, and definitely keeping the high carb foods out of my diet, which seems to balance me out pretty well. And then when I'm riding, as I said, a big fan of the strop waffles. No gels for me. I've got to eat something solid. And kind of other nutritional bar, Cliff Bars I did for a while, but they're not as good, I don't think, for me. Strop waffles just nice and easy, big hit, good to go. And then I have a drinks mix, which is part of my team's sponsor. Discount deals, whatever you want to call them. A bottle of that is only 188 calories with no real sugar in whatsoever, but lots of ways to make me faster. So diet kind of balanced out to, I tell people I do keto and it's easy to talk about that way because people kind of get it. But then what I'm really doing is I'm just watching the grams of carbs as much as I can and just keeping it to a point where I use keto foods, but I'm not, directly into a full-on keto diet, which, helps me out, balances it out, and allows me to continue doing what I'm doing with enough energy to get going. Now, I did mention, and I've noticed this a couple of times, my wife made a cake the other week, and it was a Victoria sponge cake, which I love Victoria sponge cake. So over the course of the week, there was slices of that every day in the evening. And what I found was I was faster on the bike. So carbs are important to go riding, and people will tell you there's no problem at all. But there is a balance between the number of carbs. And I'm, if I went and ate a pizza, which I won't do unless it's cauliflower based now, but if there was a pizza on the table, I would just keep eating and eating and eating and eating. And that was my Achilles heel, is trying to balance out the number of carbs I would take in to what I was actually exerting. And so now I've got to this, I like to think as a balance where I do that. Now, to be honest, it isn't just the diet that's the thing, and I talked about the exercise. I did also introduce weightlifting and lifting heavy things to build muscle mass, which also burn more calories, which also balances it out, as well as all the cycling. So, I mean, it's not a very complicated formula. It's, watch the number of carbs that you take in, and I base it on keto. Watch the exercise. So I do weightlifting twice a week for about 30 to 40 minutes a session, depending on how I go. And I ride 6 days a week, and anywhere between 115 and 200 miles a week, depending on what's going on in that week, unless it's a recovery week, obviously. So all of those things factor in, and all of those things have helped me drop from, well, even before we moved to the States, I was above 300, but when we got here it was 265, and 265 to 200 is floating around 200 is where I'm at. I'd like to get a bit lower next year, so we're going to keep running the diet and see how we get on. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you because people always ask me what did you do? What's the secret? What's the diet you're on? And literally that's all it is. The other thing I will say though is I did discover in the last year LMNT packets, the salt packets, flavored salt packets, and the research around the fact that it doesn't matter how much salt you have, it doesn't affect the heart. There's research out there. I can't remember the links, but there's some out there now. And if you've got too much, you'll just sweat it out or whatever it may be. But that's balanced with exercise. But taking a salt packet when you're feeling a bit low and down in the afternoon on a keto diet or a low carb diet will actually pick you back up again, because that's usually the time of day I get a bit sluggish, 2:30 to 3:30. Taking a drink with a salt packet in it picks you right up, electrolytes on, ready to go. And that was the other thing that I learned when eating on the bike and taking the carbs on, is I would exercise quite hard, get home, and then I'd have to sit down, and it would take me like 4 or 5 hours before I could get up not being dizzy or anything like that. And so actually fueling on the bike, fueling the work, as Ivor says, I mentioned that in the introduction, taking the extra salt occasionally just in a salt packet to get me going. I've not had any of those issues in the last year to make that in terms of the lifestyle change. Anyway, I've just come to learn to live with the diet that I've got. It doesn't affect me anymore. I don't miss any of the things that I don't eat. The biggest one for me was bread, and we found the keto alternative for that. There's lots of different options now, and I love it. I will say though, well, this is a weird one, and I'm just going to add it on the end, but when I first started this, I wasn't a big fan of zucchinis or courgettes, depending on where you're listening from. And now I will quite happily cook those and put them in my diet, and to the point my wife made me zucchini bread and didn't tell me what it was until after I said it was really good. It was like a chocolate cake. It was fantastic, fully keto. And yeah, I'll quite happily have zucchini chicken boats or zucchini chips or whatever you want to put in front of me. Zucchini I'll eat away, and I guess it was just a way of my body getting rid of the refined sugars, and off we go. But that's really what keto is. Remove carbs, remove refined sugars, and it's basically empty carbs is what you're removing, so which generally comes from refined sugars. So that's what works for me. May not work for you, but I wanted to let everybody know, so that's how I did it. Thanks.